But I have to admit, you really do get a little proud to be human in such a moment. But about the NASA curse and that Telemasect conspiracy thing, I think it's important to have someone like me, for instance. I'm perfect for that since I have a theory behind it. We need to know, right? We can't just take everything for granted. We can't just say, oh, okay, NASA, if you say so, then it's fine. We can't just accept NASA's claim they are doing this to help us, because the consequences of being lied to this time around are so incredibly extreme. But I don't think it's all that strange that they're trying to fake things and such simply because of the Fermi paradox. They're just afraid of being stopped. And you notice it, for example, during that marathon broadcast on the pre-show there. So being up all night, the entire night, showing the live images from Florida. Then you saw that they didn't have any floodlights on the rocket, right? It seems as if they're afraid someone might do something, that they're anxious all the time. If you're following the press conference and things like that, you'll see that there are always these guards standing around to make sure that nothing bad happens. And then there's that whole thing, that NASA started, this idea where you can actually have your name put on a small chip that goes along on the space mission and all that kind of stuff. You understand, who's most interested in it. I find it quite exciting. It's the children, isn't it? And those psychopath psychologists, right? Like let's say Jack Parsons had been a psychologist, or for example, Ted Bundy, that serial killer. He was actually going into psychology, So, right? I wonder if psychology might just attract a lot of those kinds of completely bonkers, truly crazy individuals, but who are also incredibly intelligent. Because in that situation, you can operate and be truly awful without anyone ever realizing it, especially if you're also smart, because then if they start to learn in detail how the brain functions, they can truly begin to manipulate our brains, which I've talked about quite a bit before. So I think it's important that we at least are allowed to talk about it. It was back in October when NASA withheld the images from 3I Atlas. That was the first time I started thinking, what's up with NASA? What is it? I started to think maybe they're going to discover what 3I Atlas was for themselves and not just holding on to the images for 43 days. That they took the images into their own research and began to scrutinize the images because they wanted to understand what this interstellar object was. But on the surface, they just laugh off that whole 3I Atlas thing. And the management of NASA seemed to be laughing it off, the question of what 3I Atlas was and so on. No, haha, it's just a regular comet, right? I mean, that is completely idiotic behavior from their side. And you meant to bring up Avi Loeb again. He has been sort of the figurehead from Harvard and his team, and he completely agrees, and I completely agree with him. To be in the space exploration industry and to claim those things when interstellar objects actually appear. Just laugh off interstellar objects. That's just insane, no matter how you look at it. But for my theory, those interstellar objects are important. I have written an entire article just on that. My mini article 1 from last fall is proposing specifically how interstellar objects are used to communicate. Because when interstellar objects arrive, excuse me for a moment, it's not that interesting to watch the ocean. It's still an hour before anything happens. It's going to be a full hour before it begins. This is not something that's very exciting to watch. But I'll be keeping a very close eye on this situation. But at least we definitely know the situation. Now the crew just needs to get themselves out of that hatch. Well, because the whole thing with interstellar objects, it is truly quite unique. As I write in my mini articles 1 and 2 as well, it's because if there exists extraterrestrial life, let's say there exists a life form very, very far away, that somehow manages to control objects within our solar system or within our galaxy. It could be very probable that they are utilizing interstellar objects. That would indeed be an absolutely perfect method to communicate from the outside. Because if some unusual object now enters our solar system from outside, if it were to carry information, that information must come from an alien life form out there, because we certainly can't be sending in these interstellar objects ourselves. They arrive at enormous speeds, at unique angles, don't they? They just come right in from the outside. Well, before I continue, I need to address something. Last time we were discussing how many planets there were in our solar system. I just guessed around 20-something. But officially there are 8. But then it's a question of how you define it, because there are these planets and many moons and such things. It's a question of how we define it then. But if someone asks you how many planets there are in our solar system, you should answer 8. But actually there are hundreds if you were to include all those moons and smaller objects and things like that. Just so that we're clear on this then. Yes, but you see there are comets and similar objects within our solar system, and these comets, they do have specific orbits that they adhere to, precisely because they are indeed part of the solar system itself. So if one of them were to come and crash into our Earth, they would behave very predictable. They would just come a little bit out of their established orbit before they would near Earth. But when it comes to interstellar objects, they simply arrive from a completely different direction. And I also think they travel at higher speeds. But they at least come from a completely different angle. So that's how they detect them on their screens. Because first the object is one dot among many dots. And then they see that this one dot just comes from a completely different angle. That's how they know it has to be an interstellar object. Anyway, for NASA to almost ignore them, I think that's very strange. It really started with NASA ignoring the first observed incoming object in 2017. Oumuamua looked almost like this pen here. We have never seen this shape in space before, ever. We haven't seen this before. You know, comets and meteorites and such usually tend to have a kind of some kind of round shape then, at least. But the interstellar incoming Oumuamua in 2017 had a width-length scale of 1 to 10. It's not quite like this pen, but it had that ratio of width to length, 1 to 10. So it almost looks like such a large part of a ballpoint pen then. So it just came fluttering in, that's all. That was really strange. My God, we've never seen anything like it before. What I thought was that it looks like the number 1. So it meant it was the first interstellar object we could observe. Oumuamua was the first, one in, as in the number 1. You see, Oumuamua actually was the very first interstellar object detected in midair. They have a system for these objects. They number them I1, I2, I3, and so this first one was I1. But its more common name was Oumuamua, which means a messenger from afar, named from Hawaii, because it was discovered from there, which is near to the Splashdown site, actually. It's not that far. Well, it is quite a ways off, but it's not that far from Hawaii. It's right outside San Diego in California, you see. But we saw it on the map earlier, so it's very much like all of this that we're talking about is quite centrally located around that area, both with all that, with Los Angeles and Telma and NASA, and even Oumuamua, because Oumuamua was discovered from Hawaii, which isn't that very far from there. So just the fact that it arrived in that particular form was really strange, I thought, and Avi Loeb also felt the same way. And if I hadn't had Avi Loeb and his team to lean on, I would have simply been dismissed as just some internet quack, as some people tend to call it. So that's why it's incredibly valuable to have the support of Harvard researchers who I've become extremely grateful for Harvard's involvement in this, because the officials could all have simply thrown itself into NASA's stand, hidden themselves with NASA, you could say. Wait, now we see the ship beginning to approach the capsule, but this whole thing is going to take some time. When I think about it, Chistina's coming out then. It would be quite nice to see her again, emerging out of the capsule. Well, so just so that, because it really does make quite a big difference if I'm just sitting here alone saying it, and that I can document that there are also other researchers, prominent, really brilliant researchers, you know. If you're a professor at Harvard, then you're not just a professor, then you are, how should I compare that then? Well, I believe Harvard is probably ranked as number one. It's ranked as number one in the whole wide world, the university, globally, in the entire world. You can just imagine, you know, now you have a place like Oslo University, and they're like in the 60th, 70th position or something like that. It's the highest one that we have up here in the Nordics or something like that. Wait, I believe it's Stockholm University, actually. Yeah. That's what I am most proud of, actually. Stockholm University, it is actually considered the highest ranking around here. But even Stockholm University, you can actually check this yourself. I looked it up a couple of years ago, and it was, even Stockholm University is perhaps in 15th place, or maybe 14th, 15th place. But Harvard is like number one. It has been that for a very long time, and it has a whole bunch of Nobel Prize winners and things like that. So that the support comes from Harvard, that's what I've truly learned. I've learned to appreciate that, and also learned that when I've engaged in this debate out here on the internet, that this is a very politically charged, I mean, it's a very sensitive topic. And then I have to admit I am, a little bit disorganized, right? So, for instance, during the live broadcast, I sometimes say things a little bit incorrectly. Yeah. For example, that whole thing about the age of the moon last time. But if there is a season 2 in this podcast, I believe I'll be bringing Grok along on my mobile phone. That way, every time a point comes up where I'm not entirely certain, I'll just ask Grok live on air, so Grok can tell us. Because then I don't have to guess wildly. Like last time, for example, I had to guess how old the moon was. And I looked it up afterwards. I guessed 10 billion years just to say something. But the truth is 4.5 billion years. The moon is approximately 60 million years older than the formation of the solar system. It wasn't quite close now, but you understand. But if these people out there, if they're just looking for such things, they'll say, oh, he doesn't even know how old the moon is, right? Then he can't be anything. I mean, it seems they use every single little chance to undermine you. And that's why I've started bringing those diplomas into the studio, because might also claim, no, he has no education. They just say it, even if they know you are educated. They just say it to undermine you, right? No, he's not educated. And then the listeners have to spend, they'd have to spend many years before they might figure out that I actually was educated, right? So I just bring it to the studio to have it, just document it once and for all, not to give them the leverage.